During the early years of the Nazi regime, the wives of high-ranking officials lived in spacious, well-kept houses far from the conflict. They took care of the children, managed the household staff, and oversaw daily tasks. While their husbands worked for the state, they organized meals, received guests, and kept things in order. Some knew what was happening, others didn't ask questions. All lived with privileges and strict rules. They didn't take part in decisions, but they understood their role: keep the home peaceful and protect the family's name. Speaking in public was uncommon, writing even less so. Their education reinforced the idea of not interfering. From their homes they witnessed meetings, visits, and orders take place. When the war began, some moved with the children, others stayed. And when the regime fell, many were left alone, without resources or protection, with children to care for. Some were interrogated, others disappeared. None returned to their previous life. What happened decades later to the women who stood beside Nazi power? Florentine Rost van Tonningen, from SS wife to symbol of the Dutch far right. Florentine Heubel was born in Amsterdam. Her father, Gustav Adolf Heubel, worked at the bank Jan Joel and Company. Her mother, Cornelie van Heren Nooman, came from a wealthy family. As a young woman, Florrie lived in Hilversum. In the 1930s, she joined the Nazi youth of the NSB. At that time, she was studying biology at the University of Utrecht and was interested in animal behavior. In the summer of 1936, she was in Berlin for her studies. There, she was struck by Hitler and the way the regime was organized. In 1937, she traveled to the Dutch East Indies, where her older brother worked as an agricultural technician. In 1939, her brother introduced her to Meinoud Rost van Tonningen. On the 10th of May, 1940, when the German occupation of the Netherlands began, Florentine was in Berlin. She recounted that, according to her, Germany sought to stop the British, whom she accused of acting with duplicity. On the 21st of December, 1940, she married Meinoud Rost van Tonningen. The couple requested permission from Himmler to marry, which was granted after reviewing her family tree. It was the first SS wedding on Dutch soil. They had 3 children. Grimbert was born in 1941, Ebbe in 1943, and Here in 1945. On the 28th of April that year, Florentine was with her children on the island of Terschelling. She later fled with them to Goslar, passing through Cuxhaven. Her parents were already there in a family home. Meinoud was arrested by Canadian soldiers on the 8th of May in Terschelling, the same day Florentine's brother Wim Heubel died in combat with the SS near Elst. After the conflict, Meinoud died while imprisoned in Scheveningen awaiting trial. Officially, it was said that he committed suicide by jumping down a staircase. His wife never believed that version. She claimed he was killed inside, as he knew too much about shady dealings involving powerful figures due to his position at the Nederlandse Bank. On a television program called Het Zwart Schaap, a member of the NIOD Institute, J. van der Leeuw, supported Florentine's version. According to him, Meinoud had been murdered. After her husband died, Florentine remained involved in far-right circles. She lived a very modest life, like other former Dutch Nazis who were under surveillance. In 1952, she moved to The Hague, to a house in Velp called Villa Ben Trovato. She said the name was special because in Rovato she saw the letters of her surname, Rostvantonning. At that time she was selling heaters and had registered a patent. She also filed several complaints to recover the site where her husband had been buried. The case even reached the Supreme Court. In 1968 she appeared in a documentary about Anton Adrian Mussert, directed by Paul Verhoeven. It was the first time she spoke publicly since the war. From the 1970s onward, her house became a meeting point for Nazi sympathizers. The police searched it several times without finding evidence. There was even an attempt to set the house on fire. In her book Op zoek naar mijn huwelijksring, she recounted that she suffered raids, broken windows, and almost daily attacks. She was convicted several times for distributing Nazi propaganda and organizing far-right gatherings. She maintained contact with former regime sympathizers, including names like Robert Forison, David Irving, and Gudrun Himmler, among many others. Since 1990, she exchanged letters with journalist Willem Oltmans. Her personal archive can only be reviewed with the permission of her assistant and right-hand man, Ronald van der Helm, who accompanied her for nearly 3 decades. He keeps the wedding ring Florrie wore for 67 years. That ring, with the Tree of Life design, was touched by Hitler during the ceremony. For her, that made it special. Throughout her life, she received a pension from the Dutch state for being the widow of an official considered honourable. When this became known in 1986, it caused controversy, but Parliament decided to continue the payments. In the year 2000, at 85 years old, she appeared on a VARA television programme. She defended herself so fiercely that the programme's director considered cancelling the broadcast. Shortly afterward, she moved to Belgium, where she said she lived in exile. She died in 2007, never changing her beliefs. Lina Heydrich, the wife who protected the legacy of the Butcher of Prague. In late 1930, Reinhard Heydrich was a young naval officer with promising prospects. He was tall, athletic, played the violin well and danced with elegance. In Kiel, many girls from wealthy families competed to go out with him. Although known for being unfaithful since 1928, he had been dating the daughter of a shipbuilder close to Admiral Raeder. It is said they were even engaged, although this was never confirmed. But everything changed on the 6th of December 1930, when at a party after a regatta at the Kiel Rowing Club, he met Lina Mathilde von Osten, a 19-year-old girl. He was 26. Lina came from a noble but not wealthy family. She was born on the 14th of June 1911 in Fehmarn, a small Baltic island. Her father was a teacher and the salary didn't allow for luxuries. She was attractive, determined and somewhat stubborn. After finishing high school, she studied at a business school because her family couldn't afford university. Very conservative and nationalist, like her family, she followed in the footsteps of her brother Hans, who was already in the SA. In 1929, she attended a Nazi party event, was impressed by Hitler, and joined immediately. From then on, she was deeply involved in the party. Lina and Reinhard became a couple quickly. The first thing she gave him was a copy of Mein Kampf, although it seems he never read it. Reinhard only cared about his work. He shared conservative ideas, but politics didn't interest him much. The problem arose when they officially announced their engagement. The news appeared in society pages, and Heydrich's ex-girlfriend got angry. She confronted him, and he treated her badly. She then complained to her father, who informed Admiral Raeder. This led to an official investigation. In the Navy, breaking an engagement was a serious matter, though not always career-ending. But Heydrich not only ignored the girl, he also acted arrogantly before the tribunal. That attitude worked against him. On the 31st of May 1931, he was dismissed from the Navy for lack of honour. He was granted a monthly stipend of 200 marks for 2 years as compensation for his good service record. But that was little consolation for someone so ambitious. Finding work in crisis-hit Germany wasn't easy, especially with that background. Getting married under those conditions was impossible. Lina's parents told her to leave him, but she refused. She believed in his potential and set out to help him. She thought the party might offer a solution. My husband ended up in politics by accident. If he hadn't gotten involved, he could have been a famous violinist, a professional fencer, or a prominent naval officer, Lina wrote in her memoirs. Following her advice, Heydrich joined the party with help from Karl von Eberstein, a family acquaintance. But at that moment he held no position of influence within the party. When Himmler started looking for someone to set up an intelligence service within the SS, Eberstein mentioned Heydrich, saying he had been a naval intelligence officer. But that was a mistake. Heydrich had only taken a radio course. Due to the similarity of terms in German, no one noticed. Himmler summoned Heydrich for an interview on the 14th of June 1931 at his home near Munich. He was ill and cancelled, but Lina insisted they should go anyway, and they took the train. Although they were not initially welcomed, the interview took place. Heydrich, realizing Himmler knew little about the subject, drew up an improvised plan with ideas taken from spy novels. That impressed Himmler. A few days later, with Hitler's approval, he was named head of the SD. Lina would later say, "That was the best day of our lives." The salary wasn't much, but enough to get by. So they married on the 26th of December 1931 in a small church in Schleswig-Holstein. Heydrich didn't wear a uniform but a suit and top hat. Lina said he didn't like wearing uniforms and only did so for work. At first they lived in a shared apartment in a Munich neighborhood. Often their home became an office. Soon their sons Klaus and Heide were born. Heydrich was a workaholic, but always tried to spend some time with the children. Over time, Heydrich changed. From being indifferent to politics, he began to fervently embrace Nazi ideas. He left the Catholic Church and adopted party ideology. Lina had much to do with that. Anti-Semitism was already part of the discourse at home. But as he rose in rank, their relationship cooled. He worked too much and had many affairs. Lina knew, "My husband liked any woman who wore a skirt." Although unconfirmed, it seems she also had a relationship with Walter Schellenberg, an SS officer, but Heydrich, well informed, ended it abruptly. They later reconciled and had a daughter, Silke, whom Heydrich was especially fond of. From then on, and at least publicly, everything returned to normal. Lina enjoyed her role as the wife of a key SS figure. She didn't get along with Himmler's wife, but held her place. Heydrich became even more powerful after his role in the Night of the Long Knives. He led the Gestapo, the RSHA, Interpol, and was appointed overseer of Bohemia and Moravia. For his brutality in Prague, he was nicknamed the Butcher. But after crushing the resistance, he changed tactics. He pacified the region and improved employment for Czechs. He seemed like a ruler fully in control. Lina lived in luxury. That alarmed the Czechoslovak government in exile. They sent a team to assassinate him. On the 27th of May 1942, he was attacked, and on the 4th of June at 4:30, he died from an infection. A grand funeral was held in Prague, and he was buried in Berlin alongside famous military men. Hitler gifted Lina a luxurious house near Prague. There, her posthumous daughter Marta was born, and there also died Klaus, hit by a car while riding his bike. Lina began withdrawing from the public eye. At the end of the war, she fled to Bavaria and later returned to Fehmarn. She went through the denazification process and avoided extradition to Czechoslovakia, though in 1948 she was sentenced to life imprisonment in absentia. Until the end, she denied knowing anything about her husband's crimes. She always defended him. She attended SS veterans meetings where she was warmly welcomed. She never stopped believing in Nazism. Between 1956 and 1959, she won a lawsuit against the state of Schleswig-Holstein to receive a widow's pension for a general who died in service. In 1965, she married Mauno Manninen, a Finnish theatre director. They restored the old family house and turned it into a restaurant popular with sympathizers of the old regime. But in 1969, a fire destroyed the place and her second husband died. Lina was left alone once again. She refocused on Heydrich. In 1976, she published a book claiming she knew nothing about the final solution. Lina von Osten died in Fehmarn on the 14th of August, 1985. Ilse Hess, half a century of silence, loyalty and Nazi propaganda. Ilse Hess, born Pröhl, came into the world on the 22nd of June 1900 and died on the 7th of September 1995. She was a German public figure known for her publications after the end of the war. Ilse Pröhl grew up in an environment of conservative and patriotic ideas. She was one of three daughters of physician Friedrich Pröhl, who held a comfortable economic position, and his wife Elsa, whose maiden name was Meinecke. Her father died during the failed coup known as the Kapp Putsch. After that, her mother remarried Karl Horn, an artist who directed the Museum of Art in Bremen. She met Rudolf Hess in April of 1920 in the city of Munich. She was one of the first women admitted to the University of Munich to pursue studies. In 1921, she joined the Nazi Party for the first time. Later, in 1925, she rejoined as a member when the party was reactivated, this time with membership number 25,071. From the beginning, she felt very drawn to Rudolf Hess, although he did not seem entirely interested in a relationship. It was Ilse who introduced Hess to Hitler himself, who enjoyed attending gatherings of women from wealthy families. Ultimately, it was Hitler himself who encouraged them to marry. The wedding took place on the 20th of December 1927, also in Munich. Hitler even became the godfather of the couple's only son, Wolf Rüdiger Hess, born on the 18th of November 1937. After Rudolf Hess flew alone to Scotland in 1941 in a peace attempt, Ilse left Munich with her son and settled in Hinterlang. On the 3rd of June 1947, like other women whose husbands had been sentenced or executed following the Nuremberg trials, Ilse was detained and taken to the internment camp at Augsburg-Göggingen. On the 24th of March the following year, she was released. She then moved to Allgäu, and in 1955 she opened a guest house there. Ilse Hess never ceased to believe in the Nazi ideology. She continued to support Hitler and his ideas until her final days. She also gave her support to Stille Hilfe, a network aiding former regime members after the war. In 1952, she published a book titled England, Nuremberg, Spandau. A Destiny in Letters released under the Droffel Verlag publishing house linked to German nationalism. During that time, she maintained correspondence with several figures from the Nazi sphere, such as Winifred Wagner, who also continued to admire Hitler. Ilse Hess died on the 7th of September 1995, at the age of 95, and was buried alongside her husband in the town of Wunsiedel in Bavaria. Margarete Speer took care to raise and to remain silent. Margarete Weber was born in 1905 in Heidelberg into a well-off family involved in artisanal trades. She grew up with a stable routine and few changes until she crossed paths with Albert Speer, who was then studying architecture. He came from a wealthy family. His father was an architect and taught at the university. She showed no interest in politics, but shared some traditional views typical of her background. Albert felt at ease with her from the beginning, and Margaret agreed to marry him even though his mother disapproved. To her mother-in-law, Margaret didn't have the proper social standing. The wedding took place on the 28th of August, 1928 in Berlin. From that moment, her life became tied to someone who would go from being an ordinary architect to one of Hitler's closest men. In the early years of their marriage, Margaret focused on her home and raising their children. They had 6, Albert, Hilda, Fritz, Margaret, Arnold, and Ernst. With so many children and her husband's increasingly demanding work, she handled everything at home. She never sought attention or wanted to get involved in his affairs. She managed the household, occasionally received guests, and enjoyed the comforts that came with Speer's professional rise. When Albert was appointed the regime's official architect and later Minister of Armaments, the family moved into larger residences, first to a house in Berlin, then near the Berghof. They had more luxuries, but she remained very isolated. While he spent his days in meetings, factories, and encounters with Hitler, she took care of the children in a well-equipped house but far from the spotlight. Margarete did not want to join the circle of wives of Nazi leaders. She had no close relationship with Eva Braun or with the wives of Goering or Goebbels. She was never seen at public events. There are barely any photos of her from the regime's era. Her routine remained in the background, focused on her duties, without engaging in politics. Her relationship with her husband grew distant. Though they stayed married, he had a mistress named Karin von L., with whom he maintained a long-term affair during the final years of the Reich. Margarete knew but did nothing to confront him. Her approach was to remain uninvolved and stick to her routine. There was no formal separation. Later they had another daughter, and she focused on the children. During that time, Margarete continued to fulfill her role as wife and mother, without complaints or demands. In public, everything seemed normal. Speer kept rising in power while she kept a low profile. Day to day, she raised the children, hosted occasional visitors, and avoided conversations outside the domestic sphere. With the war underway, Speer's job became even more demanding. He spent long periods away from home. She moved with the children to a safer area near Lake Tegernsee. While he toured factories, visited fronts, and managed resources, she took care of the household without involving herself in anything else. She asked no questions and showed no interest in what he did outside the home. When the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, Speer was captured by the Allied forces and taken to the Nuremberg trials. Margarete, like many wives of regime officials, was searched, monitored, and interrogated. She was not arrested or prosecuted, but lost all the privileges she had once enjoyed. During the trial, she stayed with the children, paid few visits to her husband, and kept out of the public eye. Speer was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was incarcerated in Spandau along with other former high-ranking regime members. Margarete was left alone, raising her children and living modestly. She kept in touch with her husband but without reuniting as a couple. She lived quietly and was not prosecuted for collaborating with the regime. She had not been a party member and held no official positions. Her name appeared in almost no official documents. During those years she remained out of public life. She lived in Heidelberg and later in a house in southern Germany. She raised her children without major problems. Some studied, others started families. She did not participate in politics, write books, or give interviews. She did not speak about the regime, her husband, or Hitler. In 1966, when Speer was released from prison, they saw each other again. Each lived separately, but they stayed in touch because of their children. Albert lived in his own apartment, and Margarete in another place. They met occasionally, but never lived together again. Their relationship was respectful, without conflict or closeness. Speer published several books. In his writings, he mentioned Margarete only briefly. She, for her part, never wrote anything or made any public statements. She did not speak on television or to the press. She kept silent, as always. She continued her routine without engaging in debates about the Nazi past. She lived quietly, without getting involved in anything. She looked after her grandchildren, managed her home, and kept everything as before. Some of Albert's personal documents were preserved thanks to her. Some of his papers, letters, and photos were later shared by their children. But there is nothing written by Margarete. She never gave her point of view. She died in 1987 at the age of 82. Her death went unnoticed by the media. There were no public ceremonies or tributes. She was buried in a local cemetery with a discreet funeral. Her life with Speer was not mentioned. Only close relatives attended. As always, everything remained in silence. Her story includes no speeches or visible gestures, but she was there beside the regime's architect, in the shadows. She gave no orders and did not participate, but she also never left. She lived comfortably while millions suffered and never broke that silence. She was part of the family circle of those who held power, though from a chair in the background. She did not join political events, did not sign documents, did not write or deny anything, nor did she come forward to explain or defend herself. She chose to live with what had happened without naming it. No one ever knew if she approved or not because she never said. It is only known that she was there in the big house, raising children while her husband designed the new order of Germany. Margarete Speer did not want to be remembered, but she did not avoid it either. Her life left no phrases, only records. Wife of Hitler's chief architect, mother of 6, passive witness to a dictatorship. Her grave says nothing, but her name still appears at the end of any book about Albert Speer. She was there all her life without saying a word. Margarete Boden, the silent wife of Himmler who never left the regime. Margarete Boden was born in Gonkarzewo, a village near Bromberg, when that region was still part of the German Empire. She was the daughter of Hans Boden, a landowner, and Elfriede Popp. She grew up with 3 sisters, Elfriede, Lydia, and Paula, and a brother. In 1909, she enrolled in a girls' secondary school in Bromberg. During the First World War, she trained as a nurse and worked in that profession. After the war, she continued working in a hospital operated by the German Red Cross. Her first marriage was short and left no children. With financial help from her father, she moved to Berlin, where she began managing a private nursing clinic. In 1927, she met Heinrich Himmler during a lecture he gave as part of a tour. From then on, they began writing to each other. In one of her letters, Margarete called him a hard-hearted soldier, but what she liked most was his writing style and sincerity. She was blonde with light eyes, the type of woman Himmler favored. Although she was 7 years older, they shared an interest in medicinal plants and homeopathy. Both were orderly, strictly followed routines, and led a simple life. In her letters, Margarete often spoke poorly of her colleagues. For example, in a letter from June 1928, she criticized Bernhard Hauschild, a doctor and business partner at her clinic. In July 1928, Margarete and Heinrich got married. Before taking that step, he struggled with how to tell his family because she was older, divorced, and Protestant. No one from the Himmler family attended the wedding. The witnesses were Margarete's father and brother. Over time, Himmler's parents accepted her, but the relationship remained distant. On the 8th of August 1929, their only daughter, Gudrun, was born. They also took in Gerhard von Ahe, an orphan whose father, an SS member, had died before the war. Margarete sold her share in the clinic, and with that money they bought land in Waltrudering near Munich, where they built a prefabricated house. Since Himmler spent little time at home, she handled everything, including a failed attempt to raise animals for sale. When Hitler came to power in January 1933, the family first moved to Mühlstrasse in Munich. The following year they bought a house near Lake Tegen, which became their main residence. Later, Himmler secured a larger house in Dahlem, a residential neighborhood in Berlin, as an official residence. The more involved he became with his duties, the less he communicated with Margarete. Himmler's older brother, Gebhard, described Margarete as a distant woman with a nervous disposition, lacking warmth and always complaining. Still, she fulfilled her role, remained loyal, and stayed close to her husband. Since 1928, Margarete had been a member of the Nazi Party, with membership number 97,252. Himmler's responsibilities strained their relationship, but they continued attending social events together and frequently visited Reinhard Heydrich's home. Margarete hosted Wednesday teas, inviting the wives of other high-ranking SS officers. Despite her prominent position, she was not well liked by others. Baldur von Schirach, former head of the Hitler Youth, wrote that Himmler was always under pressure at home and yielded to his wife's demands. During the 1938 Nuremberg rally, she had conflicts with other Nazi leaders' wives who refused to follow her instructions. According to historian Robert Gerwarth, Margarete and Lina Heydrich had a very poor relationship. Years later, Lina criticized her in a Der Spiegel interview, describing her as graceless, very rigid, blonde, and someone who hated open spaces. Hedwig Potthast, who started as Himmler's secretary in 1936, became his mistress in 1939. She left her job in 1941. With Himmler she had 2 children, Helga, born in 1942, and Nanette Dorothea in 1944 in Berchtesgaden. Margarete, who was living in Gmund am Tegernsee with her daughter, learned of the affair around 1941. By then they were already distant, and she chose to carry on for Gudrun's sake. When the war began, Margarete worked managing a military hospital for the German Red Cross. By late 1939, she was in charge of Red Cross hospitals in the Berlin-Brandenburg military zone, including operations in German-occupied territories. In March 1940, she travelled to occupied Poland, where she saw conditions firsthand. In her personal notes from that time, she mentioned places like Posen, Łódź, and Warsaw. She spoke negatively about Jews and Poles, citing poor hygiene and difficulties in maintaining order. For her work, Margarete was promoted to the rank of colonel in the German Red Cross. In February 1945, she wrote a letter to Gerhard Himmler expressing admiration for her husband's work and asserting that all of Germany was watching his efforts. Her relationship with Gudrun was close. They spoke frequently and Gudrun visited her whenever possible. Both Margarete and Hedwig Potthast remained loyal to Himmler. In April 1945, Margarete saw him for the last time at their home in Gmund, where he spent time with Gudrun. As Allied troops advanced, Margarete and her daughter left the Gmund house. In May, when American forces reached Bolzano, Italy, they were captured and taken to various internment camps in France, Italy, and Germany. During this time, she was interrogated multiple times, but it was concluded she had no relevant knowledge of Himmler's official activities. Her responses indicated that she focused only on her immediate surroundings, a pattern repeated in all her statements. In September 1945, she was interrogated again during the Nuremberg proceedings. Margarete and Gudrun were transferred to the Flak Kaserne Ludwigsburg camp. Due to lack of evidence, they were released in November 1946. They then took refuge at the Bethel Institution in Bielefeld. Although they were allowed to stay, their presence drew criticism. In June 1947, the New York Tribune published an article titled "The Widow of Heinrich Himmler Lives as a Respectable Woman," revealing her situation. In 1948, she was classified as a minor offender in the denazification process, Category 3, which meant a light penalty. 2 years later, she hired a lawyer to appeal the decision. She claimed her Nazi Party membership was merely formal, and that her role in the Red Cross was due to her prior experience, having worked there since 1914. She also argued that despite being married to Himmler, she had no real political power. The Denazification Committee in Detmold reviewed her case and concluded she had likely supported the Nazi regime's ideas and her husband's decisions. On appeal, her defense insisted she should not be punished for Himmler's actions, arguing the penalty was based on guilt by association, meaning she was being punished solely for being his wife. On the 19th of March 1951, she was reclassified as a passive sympathizer, Category 4. Although not held directly responsible for her husband's crimes, the process made it clear that both she and her daughter benefited from his position. As a result, Bavarian Prime Minister Hans Erhard called for a new review of the case, this time in the British occupation zone. The central issue was the property of the house Margarete and Heinrich owned in Gmund. On the 15th of January 1953, a hearing in Munich concluded that Margarete had been one of the regime's beneficiaries. As punishment, she was placed in Category 2, assigned to activists, militants, and those who profited from the system. The sentence included 30 days of forced labor and the loss of pension and voting rights. In 1952, her daughter Gudrun left the Bethel institution. 3 years later, Margarete settled in Hiepen, where she lived with her sister Lydia and her adopted son Gerhard. Later, she moved to Munich and lived with Gudrun, who never stopped defending her father. Historian Peter Longerich stated that Margarete likely did not know details of Himmler's secret plans or regime operations. Still, in her statements, she always denied knowing anything about Nazi crimes, although she remained firm in her ideological views. Jürgen Matthäus described her as someone with fixed ideas within the Nazi movement and who consistently showed anti-Semitic attitudes. Though she tried to distance herself from what had happened during the Third Reich, she clearly lived well because of it. In her final years, Margarete stayed away from the public eye. She lived quietly in Munich with Gudrun, making no appearances or statements. She died in 1967, at the age of 72. Her death went unnoticed, without tributes or major news coverage. Her story remained marked by the shadow of the man she married. The hidden mistress, Hedwig Potthast. Hedwig Potthast was born in Cologne on the 5th of February 1912. Her father was a senior sergeant in the German army. After finishing high school, she went to Mannheim to train as a bilingual secretary. She worked for Kurt von Schröder before joining the SS in Berlin. In 1934, she met Heinrich Himmler and 2 years later became his personal secretary. In 1938, Himmler confessed he had feelings for her, but their relationship officially began in 1939. Himmler's wife, Margarete, lived with her daughter Gudrun and adopted son Gerhard von Ahe in a spacious house in Gmund, by Lake Tegernsee, near Munich. Himmler frequently communicated with his daughter, wrote to her every week, and took her to official events. With Hedwig, Himmler settled in Mecklenburg. They had 2 children, Helga, born in 1942, and Nanette Dorothea in 1944. Lina Heydrich noted that since being with Hedwig, he seemed calmer and less cold. According to Peter Padfield, author of Himmler, Reichsführer SS, all evidence suggests they had an affectionate relationship. A former secretary who worked on Himmler's official train stated that he kept a photo of Hedwig on his desk and often looked at it while working. On one occasion, he said he was considering divorcing Margarete to marry Hedwig, but she declined. It's possible he himself chose not to proceed, for the same reasons he prevented Karl Wolff from divorcing. The SS chief could not risk gossip or damage the moral image he was supposed to uphold. After Himmler's death on the 22nd of May 1945, Hedwig lived in Rosenheim with Eleanor Pohl, wife of Oswald Pohl. Katrin Himmler, author of the Himmler Brothers, noted that Hedwig married shortly after the conflict, although her new husband died soon after. That surname allowed her to start over, as it did for her children. Her son stayed with her due to health issues. Her daughter trained as a doctor and worked in medicine. She maintained ties with former associates of the regime, such as Karl Wolff, Lina Heydrich, and Gerda Bormann. Hedwig Potthast died in Cologne in 1994. Gertrud Scholtz-Klink, the female voice of the Reich in the shadows. Gertrud Scholtz-Klink was born in February 1902, at a time when Germany was still grappling with the aftermath of losing the First World War. She grew up in a modest family, where she was taught from a young age to respect rules and fulfill her duties. In 1929, as extremist ideas spread across the country, she decided to join the Nazi Party. Although the image of women was very traditional, her drive allowed her to rise within the movement. Her ascent in the party was swift, and by 1933 she was leading the National Socialist Women's League. From that position, she promoted a female model centered on bearing children, believing in the regime, and taking care of the home. The laws imposed by the regime completely changed the course of many women's lives. Some had to leave their jobs as doctors or lawyers to stay at home. To her, that was an ideological victory. When the war began in 1939, tensions arose with everything she had previously defended. The lack of manpower led women back into factories and fields, something that clashed with the ideals she promoted. Still, she did not change her views. In December 1940, she married August Heissmeyer, a high-ranking SS officer. Between them, they had 10 children from previous relationships. Their home was used in Nazi propaganda as an example of the kind of family the regime wanted to showcase. As the war dragged on and conditions worsened, things became more complicated. In May 1945, with the Allies entering Berlin, everything she knew began to collapse. The fall of the regime was imminent, and the danger grew greater. She was captured by the Soviets and taken to a prison camp, but she escaped and hid in Bebenhausen, where she received help from the local nobility. They spent 3 years in hiding under false names to avoid detection. But everything changed in February 1948. She was arrested and tried for using false documents and was sentenced to 18 months. Later, the Denazification Tribunal increased the sentence to 30 months and banned her from political activity. When she was released in 1953, she chose to stay away from the public eye. She remained in Bebenhausen and never made another public appearance, although she never changed her beliefs. In 1978, she published a book defending her view of the woman's role in the regime, repeating the same convictions she had upheld since the 1930s. During the 1980s, she gave several interviews in which she attempted to justify the actions of women during that time. She died on the 24th of March, 1999. She was 97 years old. Gretl Braun, Hitler's sister-in-law and wife of the officer executed in the bunker. Margarete Braun, better known as Gretl, was born in Munich in 1915. She was the youngest sister of Eva and Ilse Braun and came from a traditional Bavarian middle-class family living in Ruhpolding in the Bavarian Alps. Her father was Friedrich Braun, and her mother, Franziska Kronberger, worked as a seamstress. When Hitler met Eva Braun at photographer Heinrich Hoffmann's studio, Gretl was already working there as an assistant. Hitler arranged an apartment in Munich for the two sisters, and later they spent periods at the Berghof and Obersalzberg, where the German leader's retreat residence was located. Eva became Hitler's partner, and Gretl took advantage of that situation to live in comfort. The two sisters spent a lot of time together thanks to the resources provided by Hitler, especially in places like the Berghof, Lake Königssee, and the Königsbach waterfall, spots where he liked to relax. In May 1944, Hitler wanted to marry Gretl off to his aide Fritz Darges, but Darges chose to go to the Russian front rather than commit to her. In the end, the wedding did happen, though not with Darges. It was rumored that Gretl had a bad reputation in Obersalzberg. Some unconfirmed accounts suggested she was pregnant by Darges, although this doesn't align with the fact that her daughter was born a year later. Hitler, who also wanted a way to publicly present Eva, used Himmler to convince another aide, SS Obergruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, that marrying Gretl would be politically advantageous. Fegelein, known as an opportunist and womanizer, agreed. They married on the 3rd of June 1944 in Salzburg. The reception was held at the Berghof, with Himmler and Martin Bormann as witnesses, and it was there that Hitler officially introduced Eva Braun. As the Third Reich began to collapse, Eva Braun went to Berlin to be in the bunker with Hitler, and on the 23rd of April 1945, she asked Gretl, who was in Berchtesgaden, to destroy her papers. On the 29th of April, Gretl's husband, Hermann Fegelein, was executed on Himmler's orders after being accused of treason. The next day, her sister, now married, took her own life alongside Hitler. Gretl gave birth to a daughter on the 5th of May, 1945, whom she named Eva Barbara Fegelein. That daughter died by suicide on the 8th of April, 1971. Gretl remarried in February 1954 to a businessman named Kurt Berlinghoff. She died on the 10th of October 1987 at the age of 72 in the town of Steingarten. The Queen of Auschwitz, the wife of Rudolf Höss. Hedwig Höss was born on the 3rd of March 1908 in Neukirch, Lausitz. She died on the 15th of September 1989 in Arlington, Virginia. She was the wife of Rudolf Höss, commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp. Hedwig Hensel was born in 1908 to Ostwald Richard Hensel and Lina Florentine Hensel, née Kremtz. She had a brother, Gerhard Fritz Hensel, a painter, and a sister. She married Rudolf Höss on the 17th of August 1929. He had been released from prison the previous year after serving nearly 5 years for the murder of a fellow member of the Rossbach paramilitary group. He had been sentenced to 10 years for manslaughter and assault, but was pardoned in July 1928. Both Hedwig and Rudolf were members of the Arteman League, a radical collective later absorbed into the Hitler Youth in 1934. When they married, Hedwig was already pregnant with their first son, Klaus, born on a recently purchased estate in Salentin, Pomerania. They had 5 children. In 1940, they moved into a house that had belonged to a Polish officer, newly built just before the war. They lived there for 3 years, next to Auschwitz I. Their garden bordered the wall separating their home from the camp. From the upper floor, one could see the crematorium and the barracks. "Rudolf calls me the Queen of Auschwitz," Hedwig once told her mother Lina, who had come from Berlin to visit. Her mother was impressed by the garden, where Hedwig had spent much time, aided by Polish gardeners and landscapers taken from the camp. The ashes of burned bodies were used as fertilizer. "Kids wash the strawberries well to remove the ashes," Hedwig reportedly said, according to Rudolf's driver Leopold Heger. Hedwig's attachment to the garden reflected her role within the occupation and ethnic cleansing system in that part of Poland. For her, the garden embodied the Nazi ideological project of blood and soil, which used rural imagery to justify violent land appropriation. Both Rudolf and Hedwig preferred Jehovah's Witnesses as servants, believing them to be submissive and trustworthy. They used 15 to 20 prisoners for labor: gardeners, cooks, drivers, hairdressers, seamstresses and nannies. Prisoners even built a wooden airplane for the Höss children to push through the garden. They also watched the neighborhood children when they swam in the pool. One prisoner, Sophie Stippel, who had known Rudolf as a child in Mannheim, recognized him in March 1942 on the Auschwitz ramp. She was then assigned to the house as a cook and caregiver, prisoner number 619. During their time in Auschwitz, Hedwig hired 2 Polish seamstresses to alter or repair clothing taken from the corpses. She also had a sewing workshop installed inside the camp, where female prisoners made clothing for SS officers' wives. In his memoirs, Rudolf wrote about their life in that house. "My family was happy at Auschwitz. My wife and children had everything they wanted. The children played freely. My wife had her garden. The prisoners were kind and attentive to them. Surely no former prisoner can say they were mistreated in our house. My wife wanted to help all the prisoners who interacted with us." Stanislav Dubel worked as a gardener at the house starting in April 1942, and later testified at Rudolf's trial in Poland in 1947. He said that during Himmler's first visit to Auschwitz, Himmler was very cordial with Rudolf and Hedwig, even lifting the children, who called him Uncle Heini. Photos of these moments were displayed prominently on the walls. When guests visited, Hedwig hosted banquets and asked Dubel to procure ingredients, without giving money or ration vouchers. He had to get everything through smuggling via a friend, Adolf Makiejowski, a capo in a food warehouse, who connected him with an SS officer named Schebeck. Dubel also testified that Hedwig replaced her servants' underwear with garments taken from the belongings of murdered women. She despised Poles, saying, "Poles are only here to work until they die." In 1942, Rudolf had an affair with a prisoner named Nora Mataliano Hodis. When she became pregnant, she was locked in a cell. SS Judge Konrad Morgan, investigating corruption at the camp, believed Rudolf had ordered her conditions worsened to ensure her death and hide the affair. She lost the pregnancy after being freed. Morgan said he took her to a clinic in Munich to recover and interrogated her in October 1944. When confronted with Rudolf later that year, Rudolf denied giving the order. Himmler halted the investigation, and the case remained unresolved. Morgan repeated the accusation at the Auschwitz trial in Frankfurt years later. After the collapse of the Third Reich, Rudolf fled to Flensburg in May 1945 through the Nazi escape network. He hid Hedwig and their children in a sugar factory in St. Michaelisdonn and assumed a new identity as Franz Lang, joining the Navy. He was tracked down by a British team led by Hans Alexander, a young Jewish refugee who had fled to England. They threatened to send Klaus, their son, to Siberia, prompting Hedwig to reveal Rudolf's whereabouts. He was arrested on the 11th of March 1946 in Gottrupel near Flensburg, where he worked as a gardener. He testified at the Nuremberg trials and was later extradited to Poland, where he was tried from the 11th to the 29th of March 1947. He was executed by hanging on the 16th of April at Auschwitz. In 1964, during the Auschwitz trial in Frankfurt, Hedwig testified that she was a housewife living in Ludwigsburg and claimed to remember nothing about what happened at Auschwitz. In the years immediately after the war, the Höss children didn't know where their father was. Klaus took his mother and siblings to Stuttgart, then moved with his wife Lisole to Australia. He worked for an airline and lived in Sydney, where he died of alcoholism in the early 1980s. Inge Brigitte trained as a milliner and moved to François, Spain. There she was discovered as a model by Balenciaga, met her future American husband, moved to the US and worked in a fashion store in Washington, D.C. She eventually lived in Arlington. In a December 16, 2021 interview, she said her father was a good father and that according to her mother, he had been a very unhappy man. Hans-Jürgen became a Jehovah's Witness and severed ties with the family. He married Irena Pauli, a woman from a wealthy family near Stuttgart. They had 2 sons, Kai, born in 1962, and Rainer. Hans-Jürgen lived until his death in a house near the Baltic Sea. Kai lives in a remote area near Stuttgart in a modest house with his wife Rama, born in the Philippines, whom he met in Indonesia. They have 4 children. Hedwig died on the 15th of September 1989 while at her daughter Inge Brigitte's home in Arlington. She was cremated and buried anonymously in a local cemetery. Her grave bears only one word: Mom. When the war ended, many of the women who had once been close to Nazi power vanished from public view. Some were detained. Others returned home without facing trial. Several names disappeared from the spotlight. Some continued to justify their husbands. Others never spoke another word. Some moved away. Others never left their homes. Several did not renounce the beliefs they had embraced during the regime. Some expressed it openly. Others revealed it through their actions. Some died in the very houses where they had lived during the years of power. Others died far away, in places where no one remembered them anymore. Very few faced formal sentencing. Some lived in obscurity. Others continued their lives without offering any explanations. Many died when almost no one spoke of the past anymore. They held no positions, but they lived within that system. This is not about what the men of the regime did. It is the story of what happened to them when the power ended and all that was left was to keep living. This is how the days ended for the women who once stood so close to the heart of Nazism.